You are watching Procurement and Supply Chain Live. Now, our next speaker is Harshad Kanvinde, who is Global Practice Head, Supply Chain and Manufacturing at Slalom Consulting. He helps clients in sectors including consumer products, retail, aerospace, automotive, and technology. His areas of expertise include strategy development, business model innovation, and supply chain transformation. Now, prior to Slalom, Harshad worked at Amazon in their fulfillment by Amazon business, where he focused on improving seller experience through inventory allocation and transportation initiatives. Today, Harshad will be talking about the agility imperative for global supply chains. Harshad, over to you.
Thank you, Sean. Really excited to be here and talking about the topic that's near and dear to my heart, agility imperative for global supply chains. We have been on this journey at Slalom for last seven years. Um, Oftentimes, what we see in last couple of years, especially during COVID, that everyone is now understanding the necessity for agility in supply chain and not just the cost imperative for supply chains. But today, I'm hoping to take the audience with me on the journey why agility is super important for supply chains across different industries, for CPG, retail, aerospace, and you name it. And then more importantly, how do I look at agility and what does it even mean? And hopefully share some tips and tricks that we have learned over the years. As Sean introduced me, been at Slalom for last 7.5 years. I started the supply chain business at Slalom Consulting. Prior to that, I was at Amazon. And I would be remiss if I don't mention this. As we think about supply chain at Slalom, and as I'm building the practice and building the business, the inspiration comes from an Amazon, and inspiration comes from a P&G, where I was at P&G very closely working with them prior to Amazon. So the inspiration doesn't come from other consulting firms. And the core of that inspiration is that how do you think about supply chains as not the cost centers, but how do you use supply chains for enabling business growth, and then as we have seen in last 2 years, also to address disruptions when they happen. So agility plays a more important role, not just in disruptions, but also more importantly in business growth. And all thanks to I cut my teeth at P&G. So prior to Amazon, I was with E&Y, where I had a opportunity to start a new business, which was a joint venture with P&G, Procter and Gamble, to monetize some of their supply chain know-how in manufacturing, in new product development. So my personal experiences have shaped my thinking. How do we think about supply chain, which had shaped how we are building the business at Slalom. Everyone in this audience knows this. Supply chain has been the talk of the town, right? So last 2 years. The shortages of the material, increasing lead times, and the problems at the port. It's talk of the town. Every single day in newspapers, you are seeing ton of different articles, ton of different opinions flying around. But more and more, there is a consensus that supply chains are not just the cost centers. You need agility. Supply chains need to be responsive, fast, nimble, so that you tackle these problems. You get ahead of these problems, and you get some early warning about these problems, and you tackle these problems in a way that the business continuity is not impaired. So if I ask, as in my interactions with various different executives, boards, supply chain agility, no one will deny that supply chain agility is a must. Everyone has been aware of that, especially thanks to last 2 years and the problems in last 2 years. But what does it even mean? And agility and resilience go hand in hand. So how do I make my supply chain more agile? How do I make my supply chain more resilient so that my business continues to thrive? As we all know, again, for this particular audience, it's not lost that supply chains are complex. Supply chains are global. Supply chains are messy at times. You have ton of suppliers to deal with. You have ton of different channels you're reaching your customers and their consumers. There are a variety of partners you have to rely on. To supply chain is not a chain, is more than that. It's an ecosystem. What happens in reality, managing this mess of an ecosystem, oftentimes many companies I have seen, there is a wish. I wish that this is not that complex. I wish that it was simpler than that. The reality is messy, but the way companies often treat supply chain internally, and the way they are organized, way their systems are organized, their processes are organized, is oftentimes very linear, very neat. And there is a gap between the reality of that messiness versus how do you manage the supply chains internally. What ends up happening because of that, the cracks appear in different places. So first and foremost, the customer experience suffers. uh, Delayed deliveries, missed expectations, that starts kind of taking a toll, and customer happiness becomes a challenge. But you know what, customer happiness, and when customers are not happy about the services that they are getting, the products are getting delayed, that's very apparent. They are unhappy, and they will let you know that they are unhappy. The silent killer in this case is the value leakage that happens in all throughout different parts of the supply chain. So if you think about the supplier side of the supply chain, are you managing your contracts with the suppliers really well? Are you getting enough visibility into what's incoming to you in terms of raw material, in terms of sub assemblies? Do you have a good handle on that? Oftentimes we have seen there are problems in that part of the supply chain. How do you do planning internally? Are you managing it so that you are optimizing the value for your company? There are often problems there. So customer experience being bad is a surface level screaming at you type of problem. But these other things that are happening on the supplier side, other things that are happening in your internal operations, often lead to value leakage, that oftentimes we see that by the time they surface, it's often too late to do anything about those. That also leads to competitive blind spots. So oftentimes we see the problems and the cracks that appear in supply chain, that also lead to new competitors coming in and eating your lunch. So not having a good handle on your supply chain leads to competitive problems as well. And finally, what we see is all these problems, even after the problems surface, and even after I know the customers are not happy, even after I know that there are problems on the supplier side, or maybe the new competitor emerging on the horizon and starts to take away your market share because you don't have good handle on supply chain. Even after those problems become apparent, there is the speed at which you react and do anything about those has been terribly slow in many instances, what we have seen. So these things are symptomatic. The root cause often is your supply chain is not agile, supply chain is not resilient. So agility is important. People understand that, but oftentimes it's still lost on many people, that how does it impact your overall business? It impacts the customer experience, it impacts the value leakage, it impacts competitiveness of your business, and because of the slow reaction. Now let's talk about, okay, agility is great, agility is important, we want that so that we build a resilient supply chain, so that we can go after the business growth, so that we can address the disruptions really well. But so what do we do about this? How do we even start thinking about what agility is, and what kind of characteristics or what kind of foundation we need in our supply chain, so that we can do something about it and we can be on the journey of becoming more agile? It comes down to, in my experience, working with several companies in different sectors, it comes down to three critical things: know, predict, and act. So let me talk to you about these three things one by one. So what do I mean by know? So how much do you know about your supply chain, what's happening in your supply chain? And I'm not just talking about where my trucks are, or where my ships are, or where my inventory is, but more importantly, do you know the kind of operational decisions your people on the front lines are taking day in day out, how those decisions are impacting your business performance. So knowing is not just limited to your inventory and assets and your ships and so on, but also about the decisions that you make that have impact on the bottom line and top line and cash flow. Predict, again, self-explanatory, fairly simple, straightforward notion that can I knowing what's happening today and what has happened in the past is one thing, but do I have ability to predict different scenarios, how things are going to be in supply chain, what my plans are, and what are the different what if scenarios that I need to be cognizant about so that I can make better decisions. So do I have that ability, not just from the technology standpoint, but do I have that ability embedded in my organization and in my decision making, so that I'm constantly using that scenario analysis to predict the futures, and based on that I'm taking the decisions. And finally, the most important thing is act. Because what we see is, when it comes to visibility or no, or when it comes to predictability, many companies have been on that journey of using AI, machine learning, or using different type of new technologies off the shelf, or building some technologies in-house to create more and more visibility in terms of, I need to understand my KPIs, and I have that there are dashboards flying around all the time in different parts of the supply chain. But all those insights gathered from knowing your supply chain and predicting, even in some cases, what's going to happen in your supply chain, is useless unless those insights get translated into actionable recommendations or actions that your rank and file workers in warehouses, in your factory shop floors, in distribution centers are making. So a guy, warehouse manager in a warehouse, is expecting 10 trucks today to ship his product out to the further down the stream. And today, for some reason, for some unexpected issues, he only has 5 trucks available to him. What to do? How do you repurpose how do you redistribute the inventory? How do you prioritize the inventory to ship? Those decisions, when those people are making those decisions in real time, unless your insights gathered through knowing and predicting, they are made available to them in terms of in the form of prescriptive actions, that know and predict is not useful. So act is super important. It ties everything back. That's where you make or lose money. And many times what I see is a lot of emphasis is given to knowing or visibility, but so little thought and so little investment is spent on how do you make those visibility gains actionable for your people who are actually dealing with thousands of operational decisions day in and day out. So know, predict, and act, extremely important pillars. If you have a supply chain that's agile, truly agile, you often have really good handle on what's happening in your supply chain. You can predict what's going to happen in your supply chain, and more importantly, you have mechanisms in place. Those mechanisms could be processes or products, digital products, so that your people can actually use those insights and use them in thousands of operational decisions that they are making day in, day out. Now, there is a kicker to that. So know, predict, and act, it's not only a technology problem, or there is a lot of noise out there. There are a lot of cognitive this and digital that kind of technologies that are out there. All are important, but fancy technology alone doesn't give you agility. Fancy technology alone makes your supply chain visible, makes your supply chain predictable, or makes your people more action oriented and more optimized action. You need to transform. To get to that point, you need to transform all the levers in your operating model. So what do I mean by that? Org structure, org design, your talent, that's a pretty important pillar of your operating model. There needs to be transformation on that pillar. Your processes that you use for executing on variety of supply chain outcomes, those are important. And then data and technology plays an important role too. So you can't just hope that there is a magic bullet out there, that I buy a fancy piece of technology, or I invest into a bunch of pieces of technology, and my problems go away, I become agile. No, Organization and people, that's where that's the very core, very heart of this problem. You need to think about your org and people differently. You need to transform your processes, and then the data and technology play a role as well on that foundation. Now, all this is great. So what we have established so far, agility is important. No one denies that. Okay. Visibility, predictability, and action, those pieces are kind of important for getting to a place where you're truly agile. To get there, you need to transform your org, people, technology, data, and processes. But in reality, to get all those things done and to really, really transform is really hard, and especially hard in supply chains. If you look at the history, it's littered with so many initiatives and so many chest thumping proclamations of we will transform have failed. If I remember some of the statistics about, I mean, the numbers are so dismal. About 10 to 12% of the transformations really, really succeed. Most of them fail. And why is that? So having an aspiration of agility is good. Having an understanding of what we need for agility is another thing. But actually executing on those things is not easy. In my experience, working with multiple companies on variety of different levels of transformation initiatives, it comes down to four things. Why transformations, and especially transformations in supply chain, have failed or have been problematic. Localized problems. Most of the supply chain problems are localized problems. What happens in one warehouse and the nuances of that problem in one warehouse might be very different than the nuances in the different warehouse. You can't wish away those localized problems. If you look at past 20-30 years and the advent of ERP and advent of using ERPs for managing supply chain, and the sophistication and the advancements in planning, there has been this notion that, hey, let's fix planning and everything falls in place, and that has not worked. It doesn't work that way. You can have a wish list of, let me fix planning, or let me fix some other common problems at the enterprise level, and then everything falls in place. It doesn't happen that way. So many operational things in so many different nodes in supply chain: warehouses, manufacturing plants, distribution centers, your supplier side, the contracts with multiple different suppliers, tier 1, tier 2, and so on. There are so many opportunities of failure that you can wish for, that there is this one thing that I do at the enterprise level scale and it takes care of all the problems. It doesn't work that way. You have to give tender care and love to all those different nuanced problems at all those different places in your supply chain. So there is no one magic bullet. There are multiple multiple lead bullets. Then the second problem is scale. We touched upon that a little bit when we talked about localized problem. The notion of, let me do things at the enterprise level scale, and that will help all these problems at different localized nodes in supply chain. That's a false premise. It doesn't work that way. So good companies now have started thinking about scale differently. For a $60 billion company, not everything is going to make sense at the enterprise level scale. Maybe things that you do at a $5 billion business unit within those companies are going to be very different in nature. The solutions will be very different in nature, and they may never scale to the enterprise level, and that's okay. So you need to have the mechanisms and the way you are structured organizationally, where you're making the decision, that has to acknowledge the fact that you need to start thinking about scale differently. Not everything is fixable at the enterprise level scale. The third piece is firefighting and hero worship, and that's more talking about the culture and the mindset. We as human beings have tendency for hero worship, right? So who doesn't like someone? There's a big problem. Someone comes, it does something heroic, and now the problem is gone. But as an organization, that mindset and that culture is very dangerous. You can't get to the agile supply chain with that mindset, because ultimately the premise there, when you think about hero worship, the problems come, someone comes in and knight in a shining armor and solves your problem. So that talks about good intentions and not good mechanisms. And getting supply chain agility is all about good mechanisms. Structurally, are you thinking about supply chains so that it's modular, so that there are right decision making criteria set, and you have given ample agility and ample decision making authority to your people in variety of different nodes, so that they can solve their localized problems, they understand the nuanced problems, they have enough freedom and enough tools to go and solve those things. And you create this machine where no one hero is going to be celebrated, but the mechanisms are going to be celebrated. So culturally, I think that's a very important thing. And then finally, decision making. So localized problems, thinking about the scale and all those things only work that as we were talking about hero worship thing, that do you have the kind of decision making where people are enabled to make decisions on their own to solve the local problems that are front and center for them? Or is it a micromanaging kind of culture? Every decision is made at the top and then percolated downwards. So that, how do you change decision making? How do you enable and getting people in that agile mindset so that they can solve their own problems when those problems occur, and giving enough freedom and enabling them enough to make those decisions? I think that's super important. So these four things, the bad part is that these four things don't happen. So problems are wished to be solved at the enterprise level scale, at the central scale, not at the localized. Hero worship is a reality. Decision making is often top down, and those things prevent many companies to really go after agility or resiliency as a goal. So no matter how many fancy pieces of technology, or no matter how many millions you invest in org-wide transformation programs, unless these things are fixed, nothing comes out of that. And that has been the reality in supply chain for last several years, what I've seen. So what's the approach for success? It's fairly simple. Yeah, or should I say it's fairly straightforward, not simple. Straightforward to understand, really hard to implement. What we often encourage our clients and companies to do is, rather than thinking about problems in abstract, think about the problems in front of you. So maybe my shipments are getting delayed. Maybe I'm spending too much money on transportation, and why should I spend this much money? So all those individual problems, and there are a variety of problems. There are transportation problems, there are warehousing, you might be facing some labor issues, and you might not know enough that how much throughput you're expecting from the warehouse, and that's preventing you from optimizing your labor level, and so on. So there are so many of these tactical, actionable use cases or problems. What we advise is, start with those problems, start solving those problems 100%. Don't do a half-hearted effort. If you have a problem with transportation costs, go and do that, solve that problem 100%. As you solve these problems, new things come to light. As you get your hands dirty, don't spend too much time in thinking about how much do I have the right business case to go and solve those problems. What do other companies are doing? What's the benchmarks? What's the best in class do? I see people spending so much time in that and not solving the real problems. So go solve the real problems, solve it in a speedy fashion. And through those, as you do more and more of those problem solving at the localized level, at the real problem level, the culture starts changing. And that then organically goes to a point where you have something, you have a mindset, you have a new way of making decisions that takes you to the agility. So don't just sit, act. That's my one piece of advice, or one piece of thing that I'll urge you to do. And finally, as we close this, one of my favorite quotes from Jeff Bezos at Amazon. Amazon is run this way: true disruptions happen in customer adoption. I can change this quote to say, true transformations happen in customer adoption. Inherently, what we are saying is, unless you internalize what your customers truly care and want, and what their problems are, and are willing to work backward from those problems and be real, focus on real problems, Unless you do that, true transformations are hard, and agility can remain only a dream, not a reality. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you very much, Harshad. That was really insightful. I love the way you describe supply as messy, because it is terribly messy, isn't it? But I was going to ask you actually, because I've been hearing more and more about how supply is becoming less linear and more network-like, especially with the move to omni-channel and in retail. Does that mean it's getting messier and harder to deal with than ever?
I think it's so that there are. So let me take a step back, and so if you look at business, so forget supply chain. Overall, the way businesses are done. So earlier, maybe there used to be 3 key players, and in any industry, and they have captured 80% of the market. That thing itself is changing, right? So you talked about omni-channel and retail. Retail is not just a Walmart or Target and Amazon kind of game. You and I can start our own retail business fairly easily these days. So the barriers of entry are going down. So the messiness start there. The customers are understanding that I don't need to, if I'm more environmentally conscious and I want a different, I don't want to buy product from company XYZ, doesn't fit with my philosophy and I want different options. Yeah, there are hundreds of those options. So the business reality is that the customers have more choice these days. To satisfy that choice, there are many more vendors, many more businesses coming in. So yes, the business itself is getting more messier, for lack of better words. It's not clean cut. It's not just the prerogative of 1 or 2 big companies, and that reflects into the supply chain as well, right? So you have variety of different customer channels satisfying variety of different consumer needs and consumer personas. Work backward from that also kind of reflects into the amount of supply base and supply choices you have. And obviously the statement is true in different degrees to different businesses, different industries, but yes, it's getting messier.
Yes, and it's I was also interested to hear you talk about barriers to transformation. And you mentioned sort of localized problems, problems of scale, the mindset, corporate mindset, and also, the culture of decision making. Is it top down or bottom up? Which one of those would you say poses the most serious barrier to transformation?
I would say it all culminates into decision making. The way most of the Fortune 500 and many big companies, and it's more structural, right? So there is no better way to say it, but avoiding risk takes more precedence than doing the right thing. Let me explain. So for example, I want to do transformation. I see that there are cracks in my supply chain. My lead times are not where they are. My supply chain costs are increasing. I really don't have good handle on my cost. But at the same time, I still don't act on it really fast because people spend a ton of time to make business cases than actually go and act. So bias for action is missing in many of the decision making. Decision making is geared more toward how can I minimize the risk so that it doesn't come back to me and no blame is kind of leveled on me, versus how can I act fast and maybe there is a chance that I solve it, maybe I learn something from that failure and move on. So that decision making, unless that itself is agile, how can you expect the whole supply chain to be agile?
No, absolutely. I mean, when you put it like that, that makes perfect sense. Well, Harshad, thank you ever so much for your time. It was a really fascinating look at, the importance of agility. You hear it all the time now, don't you? But, it is absolutely vitally important, isn't it?
Exactly. So let's do something about it, and hopefully, I think more people are energized and start doing something and show the bias for action. Thank you, Sean, for having me. Absolutely a pleasure.
Great. Well, I'm sure everybody was engrossed with that presentation. Thank you very much, Harshad. Now, don't go anywhere because our next speaker is up shortly.